Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you is the kind of truth families bury like a body they hope will never be found. It begins with a moment so small, so ordinary, that anyone else would have missed it. The click of a fork, the shift of a smile, the tightening of a mother's jaw. But you're not Anion. You're here because you recognize the scent of hidden power when it surfaces. That afternoon, as holiday lights flickered across the dining room walls, Valentina heard something no grown child ever expects. Pack your things. You rely too much on this family. Not shouted, not argued. Just delivered like a quiet execution. Most people would hear a command, but in families built on manipulation, in bloodlines shaped by old-world hierarchies pretending to be tradition, a sentence like that is a signal, a fracture, a masked revelation. Because the moment a family tries to push out the one person who has carried all their weight, something ancient is happening beneath the surface, something instinctual, something strategic. Valentina felt it immediately, that cold electric snap of clarity men throughout history have felt when they finally see the system they were born into. Instead of the illusion they were raised to believe in, her brothers stiffened, her father swallowed hard, her mother didn't even blink. That is the mark of an old pattern. Not chaos, choreography, a ritual repeated through generations, isolation the moment the scapegoat wakes up. But here's what they didn't understand, and what most people never learn until it's too late. Power doesn't disappear when you silence it, it concentrates. And in that instant, as Valentina silently rose from the table, the balance shifted, not in her family's favor, but in hers. Most men spend their whole lives mistaking tension for peace. They grow up sitting at tables where smiles are currency, silence is obedience, and the one person who carries the weight is treated like the problem. Valentina had lived in that world for 40 years. But when she walked to the bathroom that day, she didn't walk away from her family. She walked out of the spell they'd raised her under. Inside the mirror, she didn't see weakness. She saw a woman finally recognizing the architecture of control she'd been born into, the emotional thermostat her mother controlled, the strategic helplessness her brothers perfected, the passive retreat of a father who surrendered authority decades ago. And here's the part most people never understand about families like this. Their power isn't loud, it's quiet. It's built on roles, on assumptions, on unspoken debts that were never truly owed. The family doesn't need to raise its voice because it already wrote the script you're expected to follow. Valentina realized that afternoon that she had never belonged at that table. She had only been useful to it. The moment she stopped being convenient, they recast her as a burden. Not because she relied on them, but because they relied on her too much. As she returned from the bathroom and sat down again, her silence wasn't submission. It was calculation, the kind a hunter feels when they finally spot the trap that's been underneath their feet for years. Her mother talked about ham glaze. Her brothers joked about nothing. Her father pretended to breathe normally, but there was a shift, a tremor only the awakened can sense. The kind that tells you a cycle is ending and a reckoning is beginning, because once a person sees the machinery behind the illusion, they stop playing their assigned role, and that more than anything frightens the architects of control. When Valentina lifted her coat from the back of the chair, the room didn't react. That's how you know a family system is toxic, not by the shouting, but by the way people pretend not to notice the moment you stop accepting your role. Her mother's eyes flicked up only when the spell broke, not out of concern but irritation, as if Valentina's exit disrupted a script she believed she still controlled. "Where are you going?" Cold, measured, practiced, home, 2 syllables. Soft but devastating, because the most dangerous thing you can ever do to a controlling system is remove the resource it depends on. As Valentina stepped into the cold, something ancient awoke inside her. The same instinct that made exiled warriors rebuild their kingdoms, the same fire carried by men who walked away from corrupted tribes and forged their own. By the time she reached her apartment, the silence wasn't empty. It was directive. It told her exactly what needed to be done. She opened her laptop, and there it was, 20 years of financial bloodlines concealed under the myth of family loyalty. Bills she covered, repairs she funded, debts she extinguished, education she financed. Maintenance she performed without ever stepping foot in the cabin she paid for. Her reliance on the family was the greatest lie ever told. They had been living on her strength, while convincing her she was the fragile one, so she severed the arteries autopays canceled. Maintenance terminated, services cut off. Not revenge, alignment. And halfway through the quiet clicking of confirmations, she felt it the moment a person crosses the threshold from being shaped to shaping. Now listen carefully because this part matters. If you're still here, type "I break the old role" twice in the comments. It marks your transformation, and it feeds the algorithm that spreads this truth to others waking up. Valentina didn't burn the bridge, she reclaimed the land. It was built. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and old leather, a fitting arena for the kind of confrontation that doesn't end in shouting, but in the quiet collapse of illusions, Valentina chose the back booth deliberately, public enough to keep the peace, private enough to expose the truth. Her family walked in as a single unit, Carol rigid with indignation, Carl shrinking into himself, Stephen pale with guilt he didn't know how to carry, Bobby scowling like a man whose kingdom had been stolen. They sat across from her like defendants awaiting a verdict they didn't understand. "Valentina," her mother began, "this has gone far enough. You've made your point. No apology. No introspection. Just the entitlement of someone who believed the world still bowed to her emotional script." Carol continued, voice sharpened by years of unchecked control. "You blindsided us. Cutting off the cabin, the bills you can't expect us to simply adjust." "I expected nothing," Valentina said. "And that's the difference between us." She placed the thick folder on the table, not legal threats, evidence. 20 years of receipts, transfers, payments, everything she had funded while they told stories about her being distant, ungrateful, reliant. Her father lifted the first page. His breath caught. His eyes sank. "You paid this much." A whisper, not disbelief, but recognition for all of us, Stephen added, voice cracking. "Yes," she said, "and not once did I make you feel small for it." Bobby scoffed, but even he couldn't hold the bravado. "So what? You want a medal?" "No," Valentina said. "I want the truth acknowledged." A silence followed, the kind that shifts the gravitational pull of a room. "Mom told me to stop relying on the family," Valentina continued. "So I stopped completely." The words fell like iron, because sometimes the most powerful act is not rebellion, but withdrawal and watching a structure collapse under its own weight. For the first time in her life, Valentina watched her family listen to her, not because they respected her, but because the world they'd built on her back had started to shake. Their silence was not remorse. It was fear disguised as confusion. Carol leaned forward, fingers clasped like a queen, preparing to negotiate with a rebellious province. "Valentina, you're overreacting. Families go through difficult phases. We can fix this." There it was, the myth of repair offered only when the consequences arrive. Not a single word about the years she carried them. Not a single acknowledgement of the sacrifices buried under convenience. "Fix this," Valentina repeated softly. "How do you fix something that was never mutual?" Her father opened his mouth, then closed it, a man folding into old patterns, unable to challenge the woman who ran their emotional empire. Stephen whispered, "We didn't know it was this much." "You didn't want to know," she corrected, "because ignorance is rarely accidental. In families like theirs, ignorance is a strategy, a shield that protects entitlement." Bobby slammed his hand on the table. "So what do you want? Money back, control of the cabin, some kind of punishment?" Valentina looked at him with a calm he had no weapon for. "I want nothing from you. That's the part you still don't understand. Because freedom isn't granted when the chains fall away. It's granted when you stop asking who forged them." Carol's voice tightened. "You can't just walk away." Yes, she could, and she had. But this moment wasn't about escape. It was about revelation, the kind that forces the architects of control to see the structure they built crumble without a single shout. Valentina stood, gathering the folder. "This ends here," she said. "No more quiet sacrifices, no more invisible labor, no more roles I never agreed to play." 3 pairs of eyes widened, not in anger, but in the dawning realization that the foundation they relied on had already left the table. The walk out of the diner didn't feel like victory. It felt like stepping out of a long, dim corridor where every shadow had once been mistaken for love. Valentina didn't rush. She moved with the deliberate calm of someone who finally understands the weight she's been carrying and the power she's reclaiming. Behind her, the family sat in stunned stillness. A kingdom discovering its throne was made of borrowed bones. Outside, the wind cut across the parking lot with a clarity she'd never felt in that house, that cabin, or that carefully constructed myth they called family. This wasn't rebellion, this wasn't revenge. This was evolution, the moment a person steps into the life they would have had if they hadn't spent decades trapped inside someone else's expectations. She drove home without music, letting the engine's hum become a kind of cleansing. Every mile put distance between her and the machinery that once dictated her worth. When she reached her apartment, the city lights flickered like silent witnesses. She walked inside, closed the door, and felt the shift fully, not just in her life, but in her identity. Here's the truth no family wants the awakened to know. When you stop being the one who absorbs the dysfunction, the entire system trembles. Because power doesn't come from being needed. It comes from realizing you never needed them. Valentina placed the folder on her kitchen counter. Not as a trophy, but as a gravestone for an old version of herself. She didn't text them. She didn't check the cabin cameras. She didn't wait for apologies that would never come. Instead, she poured herself a glass of water and sat in the quiet strength of a life no longer negotiated. Sometimes the most dangerous person in a family is the one who finally wakes up, and once awakened, she could never be erased again. Take a breath. Because what you just witnessed wasn't just a story. It was a blueprint, a revelation of what happens when the person a family depends on finally steps out of the role they were never meant to play. Valentina didn't become powerful in that diner. She didn't become powerful when she cut off the payments, or when the cabin legally snapped back to her. Her power ignited the moment she understood the truth most people spend their whole lives avoiding. You don't owe your life to the people who built their comfort on your silence. Families built on manipulation rely on one thing, that the strongest member never realizes they're the strongest, that the giver will keep giving, that the reliable one won't notice how much is being siphoned from them, that the one who carries the weight will never ask why it always ends up on their shoulders. But the moment Valentina walked out of that holiday lunch, the illusion cracked, and once an illusion cracks, it can never be repaired. Her story is not about punishment. Not about revenge. It's about liberation, the kind that comes when you finally stop negotiating with the people who benefited from your exhaustion. So ask yourself, where is your energy going? Who in your life treats your strength like it's their entitlement? What systems, family, work, relationships have mistaken your loyalty for weakness? Because here's the hidden truth. This video has been building toward. The moment you stop being the designated caretaker of other people's dysfunction, their entire structure collapses, and your real life finally begins. If Valentina's awakening hit you in that place, you don't talk about, drop a comment below with, I break the old role. Let it mark your shift, your moment of clarity. And remember, sometimes walking away isn't abandonment, it's ascension.